Okay, here we are. We're now doing crime and deviance. And what we're going to start with here on this particular part, we'll be looking at what, the type of crimes are there. We'll also consider in this area, we'll also look at the types of reporting, victimization surveys, and the other ways of keeping track of crime. We'll also look at some of the variables and influences on what, who commits crime. And then we'll finish up with the Canadian justice system. So let's get started with types of crime. Excuse me. Okay, now when we look in terms of crime, how do sociologists classify crime? Well, sociologists, they categorize crimes based on how they are committed and how society views the offenses. Now there's 4 types: street crime, occupational or white collar and corporate crime. 3 is organized crime. And 4, it's a relatively new category. It's called political crime. And we're going to look at each one of these individually, and we'll start with street crime. So when we think of street crime, these are the categorizations or the categories that you might usually think of. Violent crime, murder, sexual assault, and the like. Property crime, break and enters, theft, and things of that nature. And moral crimes, including prostitution, illegal gambling, illegal drugs. Now that's typically what we would imagine crimes to be, but we also got to look at occupational or white collar crime, and this consists of illegal activities committed by people in the course of their employment or in dealing with their financial affairs. So the key element of violation here is, a violation of a position of trust in business or in government. Now that's an important variable because when we deal with businesses, we expect a certain degree of trust, whether that's trust in the services that they provide, trust in the business that they provide, or trust in the way that they take care of us, whether it's our investments, our money. And when those are breached, then that's what becomes what is known as a white collar crime or occupational crime. Now in conjunction with this is what's known as corporate crime. And these are illegal acts committed by corporate employees on behalf of the corporation and with its support. Now, this isn't something that's normally seen or witnessed in the same way and the same degree in newspapers, but the kind of examples would be antitrust violations, false advertising, infringements on patents, copyrights, and trademarks. Now, on the surface, that doesn't sound bad. In fact, it's often been viewed as what's known as the victimless crime. Nobody gets hurt. No one's killed. No one's stabbed. However, there are costs to these types of crimes which are surprising. The costs exceed that of street crime. So the dollar value is greater than that of any street crime combined. Tax evasion costs about $30 billion a year in Canada. Now these would be all a part of this white collar crime. Now a few years ago in Calgary, a gold company, a mining company called Bre-X, lost around $5 billion of shareholders' investments. A geologist had what's called salted the core samples with gold. It means adding gold bits to the core samples to give the impression that there is gold here. Well, a lot of investors invested on the prospect that there was going to be gold, and there wasn't gold. And that's another example of this corporate crime where the corporation supports this geologist to, yes, do this so we can get more investment. Excuse me. Automobile or computer repair shops doing unnecessary work and charging for it is another example. Now, occupational accidents and illnesses were the 3rd leading cause of death in Canada, and some of the causes are unsafe working environments. So when we consider this type of white-collar crime, what are some of the problems? Well, there's way more stigma associated with street crime. With white-collar crime, it's harder to convict. There's rules that somehow protect a lot of the corporations. They have a lot of money to defend themselves. and so it's harder to convict in those kinds of crimes. So the third type of crime is what's known as organized crime, and this is a business operation that supplies illegal goods and services for profit. Now, typically, as you would expect, the examples would include drug trafficking, prostitution, liquor and cigarette smuggling, loan sharking, money laundering, large-scale theft, and truck hijacking. Now, what's surprising is when I mention truck hijacking, that's a huge operation. Because largely what's happening within this is where there's huge material goods that can be hijacked out of trucks and stolen. Now, what's interesting about that is, foods are a very big industry in this area, and some areas of food are bigger than others. Cheeses are huge. There's specialty cheeses, and when they're transported via trucks, that's a huge amount of resale value. So some of the elements involved with organized crime is that it's not centrally controlled organizations. Now, this can be gangs as well as more organized, like a mafia, but typically it's not centrally controlled. The public demands for cheap goods encourages this type of crime. It certainly has a deadly nature to it. Biker gangs in Montreal have resulted in many deaths. It's linked to legitimate enterprises. Many of the organized crime have legitimate connections, which helps make it difficult to charge and or to follow up with court action against them. Some examples would include some terrorist groups use Muslim charities to gather illicit funds for nefarious ends. ISIS and oil sales from overtaken oil fields, they produce as much as $50 million a month. So now let's move to political crime. Now, political crime isn't one you probably hear of as much. It's the illegal or unethical acts involving the misuse of power by government officials, or the illegal or unethical acts perpetrated against government by others attempting to influence decisions that they make or to overthrow that government. Now, it can include things like kickbacks. So this is getting money back for doing favors, listening to lobbyists, and having lobbyists influence decisions in legislation and then getting some benefit from that. It could be including insider deals. It can include fraud to benefit themselves. And there's been examples of this. You'll find a couple of them in your textbook. Now, when we look at crime and these various kinds of crime, what's important is part of what's important to guide the way laws are altered, changed, or somehow improved, and policies to protect citizens and to protect corporations and government, is that there needs to be a collection of data. And so official crime statistics provide important information on crime. However, the data reflects only, and this is important, it reflects only those crimes that have been reported to police. Now, this has a huge impact on a lot of different crimes. I remember reading, 15 years ago, Stats Canada had indicated that on average, and this was back 15 years ago, that on average, women who have been sexually assaulted will wait until the 35th time to report to police. Well, that skews the reporting data significantly, because the police report would record one incident of a report when in fact it had happened 34 times before. So when we look at statistics, we have to balance out the actual and the reported. So people are more likely to report a crime when they believe that something can be done about it, and that's an important feature in terms of the kinds of laws that are in place and the strength that the police have and the courts have to uphold those laws. And so there's a number of crimes reported by the police that are reported in what's known as the Canadian Uniform Crimes Report, the CUCR. And they're just the tip of the iceberg when compared to all the offenses that are actually committed. Now, one way to sort of balance out some of the reporting to the CUCR is to also include what are known as victimization surveys. And these are anonymous self-reports of criminal behavior that have made researchers aware that the incidence of most crimes is substantially higher than the reports in the CUCR. So what's important about victimization surveys is it gives people who have been victims an opportunity to offer some feedback and to give their account of the experience to round out a more complete perspective about the crime that has been reported. One survey found that less than 42% of victimizations reported by respondents had been reported to the police. All right, so some of the value, the additional information that can be value or added to reports is that with both kinds of statistics, a truer picture of the reality of crime is possible. The accuracy of the CUCR is greatest for the very serious crimes such as homicide, which is almost always reported, and for crimes like auto theft where a significant loss can be replaced by insurance if the crime is reported. And so that tends to be the most accurate recording of crime. Available statistics do not provide any information about victimless crimes such as drug use or illegal gambling. So who is more likely to commit street crime? Well, there are correlates for street crime. Now what's important here when we talk about correlates, this is not cause and effect. These points that I'll bring up that are significant correlates are not cause and effect. What correlate means is that when street crime occurs, these are some of the features that also seem to occur at the same time, but they're not cause and effect. These are just correlates, which means they exist at the same time. You can't say, for example, loss of jobs cause poverty, but it's a correlational. So is how you're raised, what neighborhood you live in, whether you're receiving any support systems at all. All of these things become part of what explains poverty, but there's no one single cause and effect. So there's not one single cause and effect related to these significant correlates. So we're going to begin with the first correlate, which is age. Now, one of the most significant factors about street crime is age. And there's patterns that we can look at that help give a picture about who commits crime based on age. Arrests increase from early adolescence and peak in young adulthood and steadily decline as you get older. So this pattern reveals that crime is typically what's considered a young person's game. It's common in all societies where data is available, the same pattern that younger people commit crimes more so than older people. Now, why is this so? Well, in adulthood, it's the time of expected conformity. Almost, it's also a time where simple maturation processes seem to be relevant. That is, you start to have a family, you have kids, you settle down, you have a job, so you're less likely to risk all of those things as you get older. Now, another one of the most significant factors is gender. The pattern here is that most crime is committed by males. Now, that's not to say that they're the only committers of crime, but they are the disproportionate number in terms of the data that's reported. Some statistics to sort of back that correlate up. Men make up over 80% of those charged with a crime. They are more involved in violent crimes and major property offenses. However, there's a narrowing of the gap from about 1968 to the year 2000 and forward. The percentage of offenses committed by women has increased from 9% to 17%. So it certainly indicates that there's a gender equality emerging, but it certainly isn't there yet. Now, lower class, this is the third correlate. Living in a lower class are overrepresented in arrests and in prison admissions. So why is it that, why is this? Well, it's because they commit more crimes and are more likely to be targeted because of their lower income, because of the tendency towards, and you'll see when we talk, if you remember from part one, at looking at some of the theories, some of those are related to people who don't have access to things or will try to find access to things that are otherwise available to most other people who have the money to pay for them. But if you don't have the money to pay for them, then you will find another way. So, some of the other affects in regards to lower income, it's higher rates of suicide, alcoholism, mental illness, and drug addiction, and are more common in lower classes. And so this all contributes to the increased likelihood, or the increased statistical likelihood at least, of committing crime. Now on the other hand, occupational or white-collar crime, it costs Canadians much more than street crime. It's higher among the middle and upper class groups. And then lastly, one other correlate we can include is race and ethnicity. Now here we're going to touch on some U.S. statistics. U.S. statistics, African American and Hispanic people are more likely to be committing street crimes than others. And in Canada, non-Aboriginal visible ethnic minorities are, non-Aboriginal and visible ethnic minorities were underrepresented in federal correctional institutions. Aboriginals, many studies have shown that they are overrepresented in prisons. Now, when you look at the other correlates, the age, income level can contribute as well. So now let's touch on the criminal justice system. Now when we talk about the criminal justice system, we include the police, the courts, and the prisons. However, it's not a large, complete, and united system. Rather, it's a collection of somewhat interrelated, semi-autonomous bureaucracies. Now, we didn't cover that chapter. That's one of the chapters that I took out because of the strike. And so when we talk about bureaucracies, these are hierarchies that have leadership at the top and everybody else down below, and there's levels. They're organized, they have a focal point as to what they're supposed to do. Now, so when we talk about the criminal justice system and we say that it's somewhat interrelated, that just means the police, the courts, and the prison have connections between them. They're semi-autonomous. The police can do some work that doesn't involve the courts can do work that doesn't involve the prisons will do work that doesn't involve the police. So there's a degree of autonomousness, working on your own. And the bureaucracies, all of them work with a hierarchy. Okay, so we're going to begin with the police. The function of police is that they are the concrete extension of the state. Now, this is where they provide the social order. So when they talk about the state, they're not talking about the United States, they're talking about the government. So they are the concrete, fingers on the ground, extension of the government that provides the social order. This is extended to maintain peace in the community, and that's predominantly what police do. It's not to arrest people, I mean that's their job as well, but it's also to sort of keep the peace in the community. Their community policing model is about being in the community and being among people, doing community support and community connecting, not to go into communities and arrest people, although that's what they'll do should someone break the law. Now they have a broad range of responsibilities: finding lost children, counseling crime victims, notifying the next of kin of fatal accidents. So when we think in terms of all the role and responsibility of the police, of what ties these diverse functions together, well, one of the things that's important is they have the authority. Within the role of policing, they have the authority to do these community activities as well as to make arrests. The authority is backed by non-negotiable force. So they have both the authority and the support by which to make arrests. And they have a high degree of discretion. And you see this often in news where either they've exceeded their discretion or they have worked within their discretion. And so it's so important in policing to be able to make good, solid, evidence-based decisions to support the authority, the non-negotiable force, and the discretion. Okay, let's move to the courts. Now the courts Their function is different than the police. Remember, they're interrelated, semi-autonomous bureaucracies. They decide the guilt or the innocence of those who have committed a crime. Now you notice, nowhere in what we talked about with the police do they decide the innocent or guilt. Theirs is to make the arrest based on what existing laws occur and under the discretion of police. It's the court that makes the decision around innocence or guilt. The process is it's adversarial. There's a prosecutor. This is the lawyer who represents the state or the government or the law. There's a defense lawyer that asserts that the accused or the defendant is innocent. And then there's a judge and sometimes jury where the final decision as to the guilt or innocence of the defendant is left to. Now, the last stage is prisons. This is the third point, and it's the punishment in this concept of social justice, criminal justice. Punishment is any action designed to deprive a person of things or value, including liberty, your freedom, because of some offense the person is thought to have committed. Now, there are alternatives to this, and some of them are emerging. And one of them that's touched on in your textbook is what's called restorative justice. And this is, to seek the return of focus of the justice system to repair the harm that has been done to the victim and to the community. And this is involved with the victim, the perpetrator, and the community to work together to restore justice. It has a traditional foundation. Some of the elements around this is its involvement of the victim and the other members of the community as active members in the process. So guilt isn't the only issue. It's around re-entry and around restoring things in a healthy way, to reconcile the offender with those they have harmed. And the roots of this is in traditional societies and in Aboriginal societies. And so it's an alternative way to view reintegrating people rather than sending them to prison and maybe doing more harm than good. Well, I hope this has been helpful to you. That was part 2. So the 2 videos are part 1 in looking at the theories, part 2 now looking at crime. All right, now everybody, let's carry on the good fight. Bye now.